On a scorching summer afternoon in Asheville, two little twin girls in torn pink dresses stumbled through the crowd, clutching a fragile bottle of medicine, the only hope to keep their sick mother alive. Then it slipped from their trembling hands. Glass shattered, white pills scattered across the pavement like lost pearls. Laughter rose from strangers, mocking their desperation. But before despair could swallow them whole, a shadow fell across the broken glass. Silas, a war-worn veteran, and beside him Valor, his loyal German shepherd. In that single moment, a forgotten soldier, a faithful dog, and two abandoned children crossed paths, and destiny itself began to turn. The sun over Asheville, North Carolina, pressed down like a heavy hand, turning the narrow main street into a shimmering river of heat. Asphalt glistened, storefront glass reflected the brightness in dazzling shards, and the air itself seemed thick enough to drink. Cars crawled bumper to bumper, horns barking impatiently, while pedestrians wove through the congestion with hurried strides. The day was alive with noise, the clatter of shoes on concrete, the hiss of bus brakes, the low murmur of voices. And yet in the middle of this bustling current, two small figures moved against the tide. Ellie and Grace were only 6, twins with the kind of mirrored faces that made strangers stop and stare, though now those faces were smeared with sweat and streaks of grime. Their blonde hair hung limp in the humidity, plastered to their pale cheeks. The pink dresses they wore had once been bright, gifts from their mother on a rare good day, but now they were torn at the hems and dulled by stains. The girls walked side by side, clutching each other's hands as though afraid the world might swallow one of them if they let go. In Ellie's other hand, wrapped carefully in both palms, was a small brown prescription bottle. The glass was warm from her touch, almost slippery from her damp fingers. Their stepfather, Richard Thompson, had ordered them out of the house that morning. His voice was thick with the remnants of last night's whiskey, harsh with impatience. "Your mother needs her pills. Go get them. I don't have time to babysit two useless brats." He had shoved a few crumpled bills into Ellie's palm, then turned back to the television without another glance. For the twins, this was nothing new. Richard's presence was a storm they had learned to endure. Slamming doors, shouted insults, the sting of discipline delivered too easily. Their mother, Lana, lay sick in the back bedroom, her cough rattling through the thin walls, too weak to intervene. So Ellie and Grace obeyed, because disobedience carried consequences they both feared. Now on the hot sidewalk, the weight of responsibility pressed heavier than the heat. "Don't drop it," Ellie whispered again and again, as if her own voice could ward off disaster. Grace nodded, her eyes wide with worry, but fate did not listen. Just as they stepped off the curb, Ellie's shoe caught on a crack in the pavement. The bottle slipped from her damp hands. The sound of shattering glass cut through the hum of the street. Pills burst outward in a spray of white, scattering across the gray concrete like a handful of pearls spilled into the dirt. For a moment the world seemed to still, the girls staring in horror as hope itself shattered before their eyes. Then Ellie dropped to her knees, heedless of the rough pavement scraping her skin. "No, no, no," she cried, her small hands scrambling after the pills, trying to gather them as they rolled toward the gutter. Grace followed, her own knees hitting the ground, tears already sliding down her cheeks. Around them, the crowd reacted, not with kindness, but with indifference and scorn. A woman in a neat business suit paused, her heels clicking against the sidewalk, and shook her head with an exasperated sigh. "Children today," she muttered, stepping around them as though they were trash in her way. A group of teenagers leaned against the shade of a brick wall, smirking. "Look at them," one boy jeered, "crying over some pills. Bet their mom's a mess too." A man carrying a newspaper chuckled, his voice dripping with disdain. "Clumsy little things. Just like their mother, no doubt." Laughter followed, sharp and cruel. Ellie's fingers shook as she tried to scoop up the pills, but they slipped through her grasp. She could already imagine her mother's weak eyes searching for the medicine, her stepfather's rage when he saw they had failed. Panic wrapped tight around her chest, choking her small sobs into hiccuped gas. "If we lose them," she whispered to Grace, "Mama will die." The words cracked her voice, and she pressed her palms harder against the ground. desperate to save even a single pill. It was then that another sound entered the scene, the solid thud of boots against pavement, steady and deliberate. The crowd parted just enough for a tall figure to emerge. Silas Harper moved with a soldier's gait, his broad shoulders squared beneath a faded gray shirt, the sleeves rolled high to reveal forearms scarred from years of service. His hair, dark and cropped close, was streaked at the temples, though he was only in his late 30s. His eyes, sharp blue, carried the weight of deserts crossed and battles endured, though now softened by exhaustion from a life he no longer fully belonged to. He had returned to Asheville only weeks ago, carrying nothing but a duffel bag in the shadows of memory. Beside him padded Valor, a German shepherd whose black and tan coat gleamed even in the oppressive sun. Muscular, disciplined, with amber eyes that scanned constantly, the dog moved as though still on patrol. His ears pricked at every sound, and when the laughter of the teenagers rose, Valor's lips peeled back just enough to flash his teeth, a low growl vibrating from deep in his chest. Silas had been heading for the coffee shop on the corner, trying to carve out some normalcy in a world that no longer made sense. But the shattering of glass and the desperate cries of a child froze him mid-step. He turned, and the scene unfolded before him. Two little girls on their knees, hands trembling as they chased fragments of hope, while strangers sneered and mocked. Something inside him tightened, a memory from another place, another time. He had once knelt in the dust of Fallujah, cradling a child no older than these girls, her eyes wide with the same helpless terror. He had carried her to safety, but not all were so lucky. That memory had followed him home, haunting his nights. And now here it was again, in broad daylight. Without hesitation, Silas stepped forward. He dropped to one knee on the hot concrete, ignoring the sting as grit bit into the fabric of his pants. "Stop," he said gently, his voice low but firm. "Don't touch them anymore. You'll ruin the medicine." Ellie gasped and looked up. The man towering above her wasn't like the others. His face bore lines carved by struggle, but his eyes held warmth, a steady calm that seemed to reach out and wrap around her. Grace shrank against her sister, clutching her arm, but Valor moved closer, lowering his great head until his amber gaze was level with hers. Instead of fear, the girl felt only the strange certainty of safety. "Sir, can you save them?" Ellie's voice cracked, barely more than a whisper. "If I don't have it, my mom." Silas nodded once, slow and sure. With careful fingers, he began gathering the scattered pills, his big hands moving with surprising patience. Each pill he placed into his palm as though it were something precious, not to be wasted. The crowd shifted, their sneers fading under the weight of his calm determination. A few turned away, embarrassed. Valor stood over them, body taut, ears forward, daring anyone to come closer. When the last pill was collected, Silas handed them back to Ellie. Her small hands closed around them tightly, her knuckles white. Tears clung to her lashes, but this time they shimmered with a fragile relief. For the first time since the bottle had shattered, she drew a steady breath. Grace, still clutching her arm, whispered a thank you, her voice trembling like a leaf in the wind. Silas looked at the girls and felt something twist inside his chest. Their faces were too familiar, echoes of someone he had once known, someone he had once loved. But the thought was fleeting, quickly drowned beneath the urgency of the moment. He rose to his feet, extending a hand. "Come on," he said. "Let's get you two back to the pharmacy. We'll make this right." Ellie and Grace glanced at each other, then at the man and his great dog. Slowly, hesitantly, they took his hand. And in that moment, with Valor standing guard and the crowd's laughter fading into silence, the story of their lives began to change. The bell above the pharmacy door jingled softly as Silas stepped back inside, Ellie and Grace clinging to his hands, Valor padding close behind. The bright fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sterile glow that contrasted sharply with the chaos of the street outside. The pharmacist, an older man with wire-rimmed glasses and a balding crown, peered at them curiously. He had seen the twins before, small, polite, always with their heads bowed, but today they were accompanied by a tall stranger and his imposing German shepherd. Silas spoke with calm authority, explaining what had happened. and within minutes a replacement bottle was provided. He slipped a few bills onto the counter before the girls could protest. "Debt isn't for children," he said firmly when Ellie tried to speak, his gaze silencing her. Outside, the sun was beginning to lean westward, the oppressive heat giving way to long shadows stretching across the sidewalks. Silas led the twins across the street toward a small diner with faded red awnings and glass windows clouded by steam. The aroma of frying bacon and fresh coffee drifted out each time the door swung open. Inside, the booths were cracked vinyl, the air filled with the low murmur of conversations and the clink of silverware. It wasn't grand, but it was safe, and Silas thought the girls needed that more than anything. They slid into a booth by the window. Ellie pressed the medicine bottle tight against her chest, as if letting go might invite disaster. Grace sat close, her little legs swinging beneath the seat, eyes darting around nervously at the strangers inside. A waitress in her 50s approached, hips heavy, her blonde hair tied back with a tired elastic. Her name tag read Debbie. She carried herself with the air of someone who had seen too many stories pass through these booths, but still greeted each new customer with warmth. "What'll it be, hon?" she asked, glancing at Silas, then softening her gaze when she noticed the twins. Without thinking, Silas ordered 2 glasses of milk and a plate of sandwiches. Valor lay down at the end of the booth, his massive body stretched along the floor. Though relaxed in posture, his ears swiveled at every sound, always alert. When Debbie set the tray down, Valor sniffed the air and then gave a low huff, resting his head back on his paws. Grace giggled, reaching out a tentative hand to pat him. The dog licked her fingers once, a solemn seal of trust. Silas watched with a faint smile. "He's called Valor," he explained. "Been with me longer than most people I've known. He knows who to trust." As the girls sipped their milk, Silas finally asked the question he had been circling since the moment he saw them on the street. "Tell me about your mom." Ellie's gaze lowered, her voice timid. "Her name's Lana Carter. She's sick, always tired. The doctor says she needs medicine every day," Grace added quietly. "But Richard, he doesn't care. He makes us do everything. He drinks all the time." The words tumbled out in small, broken fragments, yet each struck Silas like a hammer blow. The name Carter ignited a spark deep in his chest, a memory long buried. "Lana Carter." He whispered it silently, tasting the syllables. Once, years ago, she had been the girl with auburn hair who waited for him on the old wooden bridge that crossed the French Broad River. They had been young then, his enlistment papers freshly signed, their promises fragile but glowing with hope. Then came deployments, desert winds, letters unanswered, and eventually silence. He had told himself she had moved on, that she had chosen another life. But now, staring at these 2 children with Carter written across their faces, the silence of the past suddenly cracked open. He leaned back, his broad shoulders pressing into the booth. Memories surged nights in Afghanistan when mortars rained on the horizon. Valor pressed against his side, the image of Lana's face flickering in his mind to keep him sane. And now, after all these years, was it possible that she had carried on without him, not by choice, but by necessity? The thought unsettled him more than any battlefield had. Ellie noticed his silence and mistook it for disapproval. "Did we say too much?" she asked, her voice quivering. Silas shook his head quickly, leaning forward, his expression gentler. "No, sweetheart. You said just enough." His voice caught slightly on the word sweetheart, a term he hadn't used since speaking to soldiers younger than him, men he had led, some of whom never returned. Debbie returned to check on them, eyeing the twins with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "They yours?" she asked Silas softly. He hesitated, then shook his head. "Not exactly." Debbie's brows knitted, but she said no more, only left an extra cookie on the plate before walking away. As the meal continued, Valor remained close, his eyes never leaving the girls. When a group of rowdy teenagers entered the diner, laughing too loud, Valor rose, ears pricked, a low growl vibrating his chest until the boys sat far on the other side of the room. Ellie reached down, touching the dog's ear with small fingers. "He's like a knight," she whispered. Grace nodded, smiling for the first time that day. Silas watched the exchange with quiet wonder. He had seen Valor save lives on the battlefield, sniffing out explosives, standing firm against fire. But here, in the simple act of comforting two frightened children, the dog revealed another kind of heroism. For Silas, who had long carried the weight of survival on his shoulders, the sight stirred something tender, something almost forgotten. The girls grew more comfortable as the minutes passed, sipping milk, nibbling sandwiches. Grace tugged on Silas's sleeve. "Mister, will you walk us home? It's dark sometimes in the alley." Her words were spoken plainly, but Silas felt the undercurrent of fear. He nodded once. "Of course!" Yet inside, his mind was far from calm. The name Carter echoed relentlessly, overlapping with every glance at the twins. Their wide eyes, their delicate features. It wasn't coincidence. They were tied to him in a way he didn't yet understand, but the truth pressed closer with each passing second. As they left the diner, Valor trotted at their side, tail swaying lightly, but his eyes remained sharp. The city lights flickered on, neon buzzing against the dimming sky. Ellie held the medicine bottle close. Grace clutched Valor's fur like a lifeline, and Silas walked with them, his heart a battlefield of questions and memories. Somewhere ahead, answers waited, and he wasn't sure he was ready. The walk from the diner took them away from Asheville's glowing main street into a darker quarter of the city, where the lights thinned and shadows clung to brick walls. The twins moved more quickly, as if compelled by an invisible thread of dread that tugged them forward. Silas followed, long strides, steady, Valor pacing silently at his side. The dog's ears were sharp, his amber eyes scanning alleys and doorways, alert to every flicker of motion. The air here was damp, carrying the sour odor of rot and spilled liquor, a stark contrast to the smell of frying bacon that still lingered faintly from the diner. The alley narrowed until finally a crooked house came into view, its wood siding peeled in ragged strips. The porch sagged under its own weight, and the number nailed to the frame hung crookedly, one nail rusted almost through. The girls rushed forward, fumbling with the lock. Silas lingered a moment, staring at the door with a heaviness that pressed deep into his chest. Something about the place already told a story of despair. Inside, the room was dim, lit only by a weak yellow bulb that flickered like it might sputter out at any moment. The air was thick with the smell of damp clothes and medicine. On a worn sofa sat a woman thin, her frame swallowed by an old sweater, hair falling in dark tangles over her face. Her skin was pale, lips cracked, and when she looked up, a cough tore from her chest, so violent it left a trace of crimson at the corner of her mouth. Her eyes, however, still burned with a familiar light. "Lana." The name slipped from Silas before he could stop it. The woman stiffened, her hollow gaze sharpening with recognition. For a moment, the years fell away, and in that fragile silence, the past returned with brutal clarity. Lana Carter had once been radiant, auburn hair catching sunlight, laughter like bells. Now her beauty was worn thin, but the echo remained, trembling under the weight of sickness and hardship. "Silas?" Her voice cracked like dry wood, astonishment mingling with pain. Before he could step further, Ellie darted to her mother's side, holding out the new bottle of pills as if presenting treasure. Grace nestled against her mother's arm, whispering, "We brought it back, Mama. We didn't lose it this time." Lana clutched them both, her skeletal fingers trembling as she pressed her daughters close. Silas watched, torn between relief at seeing her alive and horror at what her life had become. The fragile reunion shattered with the slam of the door. Heavy boots thudded against the warped floorboards, and the reek of alcohol filled the small space. Richard Thompson lurched inside. He was a man in his early 40s, tall but gone to seed, his gut straining against a stained shirt, his eyes bloodshot and mean. His jaw was shadowed with unshaven stubble, and his hands twitched with restless anger. A man once capable of honest labor, years of drink had left him hollowed and cruel. "What's this?" Richard's voice rasped, dripping contempt as his gaze locked on Silas. "Some stranger in my house? And a dog?" He sneered, stumbling further in. Valor rose instantly, muscles taut, his body angling between the twins and Richard. A growl rumbled from deep in his chest, low and dangerous. The hair along his spine bristled, amber eyes fixed on the intruder. Richard froze for half a second, startled, then snarled back, "Get that beast out of here before I—" Silas stepped forward, his voice firm but calm. "They needed help, that's all. Don't turn this into something it doesn't need to be." Richard's face twisted with rage. He jabbed a finger at Lana. "So this is what you do while I break my back to pay the bills? You bring men into my house?" Lana flinched, coughing again, but her arms stayed wrapped around Ellie and Grace. Silas's fist clenched at his sides, a battle-hardened instinct flaring, but he forced it down. Violence would only wound the children more. He kept his eyes locked on Richard, the icy fire in them enough to convey his resolve. Richard spat onto the floor and staggered past, yanking a half-empty bottle from the table. "This isn't over," he muttered, before collapsing into a chair. The twins shrank closer to their mother, their eyes wide with fear. Silas bent briefly, setting a small envelope on the table near Lana's hand. She caught his gaze, her lips trembling with words unsaid, but she only nodded faintly. Without another word, Silas signaled Valor, and the shepherd followed as he turned toward the door. Outside, the night air hit his lungs sharp and cold. He walked down the alley, Valor pressed close at his side. For a long stretch, they moved in silence, the only sounds their steps on wet pavement and the distant hum of the city. Memories clawed their way back, Lana's laughter on the bridge years ago, her promise to wait, the sudden silence after his first deployment. He had thought she had abandoned him. Now he saw she had carried a different burden, one that nearly crushed her. Valor gave a short bark, breaking Silas's thoughts. The dog looked up at him, ears tilted, as though sensing the storm in his mind. Silas reached down, brushing his fingers over the shepherd's head. "I don't know what to believe anymore, old friend," he whispered, "but I know this isn't the end." Together they disappeared into the darkness, the echo of Lana's cough still clinging to the night air. Autumn settled over Asheville with a brittle chill, the trees shedding gold and amber leaves that clung to wet sidewalks. School bells echoed in the morning air as children spilled onto the playground. Ellie and Grace, though thinner than the rest, still clutched their sketchbooks, their laughter faint but fragile like glass ready to break. Yet that morning their frailty betrayed them. As they ran across the schoolyard, Ellie staggered suddenly, her face pale and collapsed. Grace cried out, trying to lift her sister, but her own legs gave way, and she crumpled beside her. Teachers rushed forward, panic tearing through the routine of the day. The twins were rushed by ambulance to St. Mary's Hospital, a modest facility serving the working-class neighborhoods of the city. Its walls were sterile white, lined with posters warning about malnutrition and substance abuse. In the chaos of paperwork, a nurse found an emergency contact name scrawled shakily in Lana's handwriting. Silas Harper. Within the hour, Silas arrived with Valor bounding anxiously at his side. Inside the emergency ward, Silas's broad shoulders seemed even heavier beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. His blue eyes, so steady in battle, now carried raw fear. He listened as a doctor explained that the girls' bodies were dangerously weakened from malnutrition. They needed immediate transfusions. "Type O negative," the doctor said grimly. "Rare. Without it, the risk is high." Without hesitation, Silas rolled up his sleeve. His arm bore scars, some long faded, some fresher souvenirs from years of combat. The nurse inserted a needle, and dark blood flowed into the bag. Valor whined softly, pacing the tile floor, his gaze fixed on the twins through the glass. The transfusion matched perfectly, almost unnervingly so. When the results came back, the doctor glanced at Silas with surprise. "It's more than compatible," he said. "It's a genetic match. Sir, these children are yours." The words stunned Silas. 1,000 unanswered questions collided in his chest. Years lost, promises broken, the silence of Lana all reframed by this revelation. He stood at the glass, watching Ellie's chest rise and fall, Grace's small hand twitch in restless dreams. Valor crept closer, pressing his muzzle against the bedrail. Both girls stirred faintly, comforted by his presence, even in unconsciousness. Days later, once the girls were stable, another storm arrived. Richard, wearing a pressed suit that barely masked his disheveled nature, filed a petition for custody. He claimed Lana was unfit her illness, her unemployment, the decaying apartment all listed as proof. The courthouse filled quickly, curiosity drawing neighbors and officials alike. Silas sat at the plaintiff's table, his jaw set, dressed in his only formal jacket. By his side was attorney Miriam Clark, a woman in her early 50s, tall and wiry with graying hair swept into a bun. Her voice carried the authority of decades in courtrooms, honed from years defending abused families. She had grown up in rural poverty herself, raised by a single mother who fought endlessly against an indifferent system, and her empathy burned beneath her polished professionalism. She listened intently to Silas before the trial, her sharp green eyes softening when she glanced at the twins seated with a guardian nearby. Richard strutted in with his own lawyer, a slick young man named Travis Hale, late 30s, tanned skin, an expensive watch glinting on his wrist. Travis made his career defending men like Richard, those with money from questionable means, those who believed confidence could bury truth. He whispered aggressively to Richard, coaching every expression. Richard smirked, leaning back in his chair, confident that Lana's fragility and Silas's long absence would weigh in his favor. The judge, a silver-haired man named Harold Brennan, 65, known for his no-nonsense demeanor, struck his gavel. The proceedings began. Richard's lawyer painted Lana as a broken woman, unfit to care for children, while presenting Richard as the stable provider. Lana sat hunched, coughing into a handkerchief, her hands trembling on the table. The twins, clutching Valor's leash, tried to stay quiet, their wide eyes darting to Silas for reassurance. When it was their turn, Attorney Clark rose with steady composure. She presented medical records confirming the twins' malnutrition, photographs of their crumbling home, and sworn testimony from teachers who described the children arriving at school hungry and exhausted. Then, in a decisive moment, she revealed the paternity test, confirming Silas as the biological father. The courtroom murmured in shock. Richard's face twisted, his confidence cracking. He slammed a fist on the table, his words a snarl. "Lies! She's mine to raise. You can't just walk in after all these years and take them." Clark remained unshaken. Calmly, she laid down another folder, bank statements, police reports, and testimonies connecting Richard's construction company to money laundering and domestic abuse charges. The judge's brow furrowed deeper with each page. The tension snapped when Richard, trembling with fury, reached into his coat and pulled a folding knife. Gasps tore through the room. Lana shrieked, the twins cried out, and Valor lunged before Silas could move. The shepherd's powerful jaws clamped down on Richard's wrist, forcing the blade to clatter to the floor. Officers rushed in, dragging Richard away as he cursed and struggled. The crowd erupted in chaos, the judge pounding his gavel for order. In the silence that followed, the sight of Valor standing protectively before Ellie and Grace remained etched in every mind present. Silas bent to stroke the dog's head, whispering, "Good boy," always. That night, back at the hospital where Lana was resting, Silas sat beside the twins' beds. His large hand covered Grace's small one. Valor curled protectively across Ellie's legs. He stared at their faces, so fragile, so familiar, and felt the weight of years pressing down. "I should have been here," he whispered, his voice breaking. Valor lifted his head, amber eyes steady, as though reminding him that it was not too late to begin again. The weeks after the trial brought a fragile calm to Silas's life. Papers were signed, hearings concluded, and the right to raise Ellie and Grace fell to their rightful father. The girls left behind the crumbling apartment of Asheville's alleys and stepped into a new chapter beneath the roof of Silas's modest suburban home. The house stood on a quiet lane lined with maple trees, their autumn leaves carpeting the yard in hues of gold and russet. It was not a grand mansion, but it radiated the solidity of a man who valued peace over wealth. For the twins, it was a world of firsts. Ellie and Grace ran barefoot across the wide lawn, their laughter carried on the wind. In the backyard, a wooden swing swayed gently from an oak branch, a gift Silas had built with his own hands. They had never known the joy of a bedroom to themselves, but now each girl could tape drawings to the wall, scatter toys across the floor, and whisper secrets to Valor as he lay sprawled between their beds at night. Their room smelled of fresh paint, of lavender soap, and of safety. Lana moved into the home as well, her health still fragile but buoyed by treatment and the relief of leaving Richard's shadow. At 36, she bore the look of a woman who had weathered storms too long, her auburn hair streaked with gray, her frame still thin from years of illness. Yet in Silas's presence, color slowly returned to her cheeks. She often sat by the window with a shawl draped over her shoulders, watching her daughters chase valor through the grass. Sometimes her gaze drifted to Silas as he repaired the fence or trimmed branches, her lips curving in a faint, hesitant smile, a memory of love not yet extinguished. Silas himself struggled with the weight of rediscovered fatherhood. At 39, his broad body still carried the discipline of a soldier, but his eyes held a softer light now. At night, he sat in the living room while the twins slept, reflecting on the years lost. Valor would rest his head on Silas's knee as if anchoring him to the present, reminding him that regret could not change the past, but courage could shape the future. For a time, the Harper household seemed safe, but safety is fragile. Unbeknownst to them, Richard had not accepted defeat. Awaiting transfer from county jail, he staged a violent escape, aided by an old drinking companion. Days later, he lurked once more in Asheville's shadows, disheveled, with bloodshot eyes and a festering obsession. The man who had squandered his life clung to one bitter conviction: the twins were his possession, and he would reclaim them no matter the cost. The storm came on a gray afternoon as Ellie and Grace left school. Their backpacks bounced against their small frames as they skipped toward the gate, where Valor waited tied to a post, tail wagging. Suddenly a figure lunged from behind a parked Van Richard, wild-eyed, unshaven, the stench of liquor rolling off him. His hand shot out, seizing Grace's arm. "You're coming with me!" he roared. Ellie screamed. Valor reacted first, teeth bared, launching forward with explosive force. His jaws clamped on Richard's wrist, the growl tearing through the air like thunder. Children scattered. Teachers cried out. Richard fought wildly, striking at Valor with his free hand, but the shepherd would not release. Grace stumbled back, Ellie pulling her close, their cries piercing the chaos. Then Silas appeared, sprinting across the pavement. His chest heaved, his eyes blazing. He grabbed Richard by the shoulder, yanking him away from the girls. The two men collided, strength against desperation. In the struggle, a flash of steel appeared. Richard had pulled a knife. Before Silas could react, the blade plunged into his side. His breath hitched, pain searing through him, but still he forced himself forward, shielding the twins with his body. Valor lunged again, this time sinking his teeth deeper into Richard's arm, dragging him down. Blood stained the pavement as the man screamed in rage. Teachers had already called the police, and within moments sirens wailed, blue and red lights washing across the schoolyard. Officers swarmed the scene, pulling Richard down, snapping handcuffs onto his wrists. He spat curses even as they shoved him into the back of a cruiser, but the fight was over. Silas collapsed to one knee, clutching his wound. Ellie and Grace flung themselves at him, their small hands trembling against his broad frame. "Daddy, don't leave us," Ellie sobbed. Lana arrived moments later, pale and breathless, rushing through the crowd. She knelt beside him, her hands pressing against the bleeding wound, tears streaking her face. "Stay with me, Silas. Stay with us." An ambulance carried him away, Valor leaping into the vehicle's back before anyone could stop him. Throughout the chaotic ride, the dog pressed against Silas's stretcher, refusing to move. His amber eyes locked on his master. The days that followed were a blur of recovery and court proceedings. Richard's failed escape and violent assault sealed his fate. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. For the first time, the threat was truly gone. Weeks later, as winter sunlight bathed the quiet suburb, Silas stood in his yard, still tender from his wound but alive. Lana stood beside him, her shawl wrapped tight, her eyes glistening. Ellie and Grace ran hand in hand through the grass, Valor bounding joyfully around them, barking with pure delight. The girls laughed, their pink dresses fluttering in the breeze, no longer torn or dirty, but symbols of a new beginning. As the family clasped hands, their shadows stretched long across the lawn. Silas tightened his grip, his heart steady now. Valor circled them, barking at the sky, a guardian not just of the past but of the promise of tomorrow. In that moment, as the sun dipped low, they were no longer broken fragments of separate lives. They were whole, together, and unshakably free. In the end, Silas, Lana, Ellie, Grace, and the loyal German shepherd Valor remind us that family is not only built by blood, but by courage, sacrifice, and the choice to protect one another no matter the cost. Even in the darkest shadows, love and loyalty can become the light that leads us home. What about you? Have you ever witnessed a moment where love and bravery changed everything for someone? Share your thoughts in the comments. We would love to hear your story. If this journey touched your heart, give this video a like, subscribe to our channel, and follow us so you never miss the next story of hope and redemption.